Holders of unsold shares in a co-op are a unique breed. Like other co-op shareholders, they pay maintenance, but they have a ton of rights the ordinary co-op shareholder doesn't have. They also collect less money than they owe each month because the apartments they own are usually rent stabilized or controlled. On the face of it, kind of an odd investment.
At the Folsom Group, our mission is to help boards make smart decisions every day. From end-to-end property management searches and construction project management to cost optimization, we help boards achieve sustainable savings, on-time projects, and long-term performance that speaks for itself.
I'm Carol Ott with Habitat Magazine, and my guest today is Andrew Friedland, partner at Herrick Feinstein. Thanks for joining me, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Carol, for having me.
So you have worked with boards in buildings that have a large sponsor presence. From the co-op's perspective, what kind of issues does this cause?
So from a co-op perspective, obviously a board would rather not have unsold shares in their building. Holders of unsold shares, as you touched upon, have special rights, which in many cases are not favorable to the co-op itself. Those rights include the ability to rent their units without obtaining board approval in many cases, the ability to sell their units without obtaining board approval, and in many cases, the ability to renovate their units, without obtaining board approval and not complying with many of the requirements that other shareholders would be required to comply with.
If they sell their unit to not another holder of unsold shares, but to somebody who would become an actual shareholder, the board doesn't have a right to approve or disapprove?
That is correct. So on that particular transfer, the purchaser has decided that they want to live in the apartment, but because the holder of unsold shares currently owns the apartment, it is generally not subject to board approval.
All right. I just do want to ask you about security. So if you have, for instance, if you're in a large building and you have a holder of unsold shares that has a significant block, you as a board I guess you won't know necessarily the people coming in and coming out, and if they're moving out or moving in. I would think that's pretty unstabilizing and can be of concern.
It certainly can be of concern, and it is something to be concerned about. In many cases, in my representation of boards, I've been successful in talking to sponsors and explaining to them the concerns that boards have about who is coming in and going out of the building. And in many cases, despite the fact that board approval is not permitted with respect to rentals, we get information from them concerning who the tenant will be. So we can be assured of who that person is. Now, obviously, they don't have the right to approve or deny, but at least we know who it is and we know who's coming in, who's going out. We can make sure the doormen are alerted if it's a doorman building, and things of that type.
But the board can't insist upon that. That's worked out through conversation. Is that correct?
It is, it really depends on the sponsor, but yes, it's something that's typically worked out by conversation, by our appealing to them and saying, we understand we don't have the right to approve, but we would like this information. Many sponsors, they're managing many, many units. They usually own far more than one unit, and they're moving people in, moving people out. And if you have 50, 100, or maybe hundreds of units, you may be dealing with multiple vacancies every single month, and you're not necessarily going back to the board saying, this is the person who's moving in. So conveying that information to them can be valuable as far as the board's concerned, and that's what our normal goal is, to get that info.
I want to segue over to the people who are the holders of unsold shares.
Sure.
Because it's kind of an odd market, to me anyway. And you recently closed a large transaction involving 100 sponsor-owned apartments. Who were the buyers and what were the complications?
Well, I can't tell you who the buyers were, but they were, it was a group of real estate investors who typically buy unsold units, and many people who, invest in that area have other investments that they use to offset, in many cases, losses that they are incurring as a result of the ownership of unsold shares.
So I'm just going to jump in. I'm assuming if there are losses, which there would be if you've got a rent stabilized or rent controlled tenant, these holders of unsold shares, or for instance, this group that you recently worked with, they're not getting a bank loan to do this, are they?
In the particular matter that I had, there was no bank loan. It was an all cash closing. So, yeah. But could you obtain financing? Maybe. I think you would need somebody who was, very well heeled. Which obviously, if you're not obtaining a bank loan, you're obviously well heeled. But if you were obtaining financing, there would probably be some personal guarantees involved with it.
Yeah, I would guess so. If for the holders that own, for instance, this block of apartments, do they have their own managing agent, or how does this work?
So when you own large blocks of shares, typically you will retain the services of your own managing agent, just because for whoever the owner is, whether it's, one individual or a group of individuals or entity, it's very difficult, to manage that size of a portfolio. Some of the smaller holders, maybe if you only own 3 or 5 units, which I've seen on rare occasion, they may just do it themselves. But if you do have a large block, you're probably going to have your own managing agent who your tenants communicate with directly. And then that managing agent decides how they're going to proceed. Is this is the matter that's being brought to my attention something that I need to go back to co-op building management on? Or is this something that I need to address directly? Or maybe it's something that I need to investigate and then decide. So, not a shareholder, one of your tenants calls you and says, there's no heat in my apartment. You may send over one of your service people to go look at it and figure out, is this something that I need to deal with, or is this a building issue? Or you may call the building and say, is there something wrong with the heat? And then, decide how to proceed from there.
But from the board's perspective, they can assume that if one of these renters, for instance, doesn't have heat, they're calling either their landlord or their managing agent. They're not calling the super of the building or the managing agent of the building.
That's the way it really should be. As to whether it really works that way is another story. A tenant in an apartment, they know who the management company is for the building, and they may, in many cases, just go ahead and say, well, I'm going to call the building manager. I'm not calling my manager. In theory, the way it should work is the tenant of a sponsor or whoever the unit is should be going to either their landlord or their landlord's managing agent, who then makes the decision as to whether they're going to go to the next level up.
For the closing that you recently did, how complicated was that? Was that in one building or 2 buildings or what?
We did 100 units across 28 different buildings. One of the more complicated transactions, just because of the number of buildings involved.
And was there a board representative at each closing, or?
In our particular case, we were able to, because of, you know, my, because of my relationship with many of the managing agents, we were able to obtain closing documents from them and agree to certain escrow instructions. And so, therefore, we had documents and we could close the transaction all simultaneously. When an individual buys a single co op unit, usually what they're going to do is they're going to go to the managing agent's office to close that. And the managing agent cancels the old stock certificate, issues a new stock certificate, cancels the old lease, issues a new lease in the name of the buyer. Same with the stock in the name of the buyer. The seller is canceled. For us to do that 28 times for 100 different closings would have probably taken us multiple days, and it just wouldn't have been possible. But in an escrow situation, we were able to close all 100 units in a single day.
So is there a market or a sub-market? How do people find out? Like this company that bought 100 units, how do they find out there's 100 units available?
Yeah, there are brokers who specialize in selling unsold shares. And so there are brokers and they're known in the area. The same way you would find out about you know, other commercial transactions. In many ways, obviously they're residential units, but it's really more of a commercial transaction. It's not, an individual's not coming in and buying 100 unsold units.
Is this a very robust market for unsold shares or a market that has diminishing apartments?
There's certainly diminishing apartments in many cases, especially with co-ops. The co-op, co-op conversions, people aren't really doing co-op conversions anymore. The preferred ownership is a condominium this day and age. So you don't really see co-op conversions anymore. So the co-op boom that was in the 70s and 80s, those units, they're diminishing and they will continue to diminish over time. There are unsold units in condos as well. And actually, out of our 100 units, some of them were condo units. But there's certainly fewer and fewer because as people move out or as they pass away, in many cases, the owner of the unit goes ahead and decides, well, I'm going to sell this unit. We fix it up, sell it, and now it's no longer an unsold unit.
In a condominium, because most of the condominiums are, were a more recent vintage, they're newly constructed. It's not like an apartment building. There's not very many converted to condominium. So if a developer has built this condominium and, has 30 apartments that have not been sold, is that part of this market?
It is part of the market, but it's not quite the same because usually in a new condominium, you're not faced with rent stabilized tenants in the units. If you have a brand new construction condominium, what you've just finished and, it has 100 units. And then at the end of the day, you have 30 and you're interested in selling the block to one buyer and just getting rid of your interest in that building. You're not going to have to sell it at the discount that you need to sell when you have a stabilized tenant because the unit can be sold to somebody for individual occupancy.
Oh, and that is a question. So these buyers of unsold shares, they are buying these apartments at a discount. Is that correct?
In most cases, when you have a unit with stabilized or rent-controlled tenants, they are buying it at a substantial discount because you cannot get that tenant out.
What is this? When you say substantial, is that 50%, 80%? Like, is there a...
It really depends on the unit. It depends on a lot of factors, but it's certainly nowhere near fair market. You may be looking at 50% or more.
I see. So finally, I want to know, should boards view these investors as adversaries, as necessary evils, or as potential partners?
I think the answer is all three. I mean, the sponsors, if you have unsold units, if you have sponsor units in your building, generally speaking, there's nothing you can do about it. They're there, and you need to deal with them, because it's a reality. I think, working with them is certainly to the benefit of the board. They have certain rights that others don't have. And as, upsetting as that is in many cases to boards, and I'm sympathetic to that. Many of the boards I represent, they say, oh, I wish I could get rid of the holder of unsold shares. I wish I could get rid of them too sometimes. It's, they have rights that you just don't want to, have in the building. But they're there and there's little you can do about it. They're slowly going to sell their units off. You can encourage them to sell their units off as they become vacant. But the best thing you can do while they're there, work with them, let them know that you want to be their partner and you understand these are their rights, but what can you do to help me? Can you give me some information on your tenants? Let me know that you've vetted them and what have you.
Okay. Very good advice. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks so much.